Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent content. The in season tournament is back in action with some great games to talk about from the Elite Eight to the Final Four. Before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok for more updates and short form content.
Yes, so the in-season tournament, it's almost at a close, and it
Yeah.
continues to be, amazing and impressive, entertaining. It's great to see, competitive basketball, this early in the season. I mean, we always every year have, some solid games early on in the, during this part of the season, but the in-season tournament really has added another layer of, competition. It's pretty clear these guys want to win these games. They want that cash prize. They want those regular season wins to add on. They want the trophy. But we're almost at the end now. We have one more round to go between the Pacers and the Lakers. We'll get into some of the previous games, before we get into that. But, some of them were, not amazing. A
They were
couple of them were,
games.
yeah, a couple of them were kind of stinkers. But by and large, most of these games were pretty fun.
Yeah.
Um, you had the Knicks and the Bucks, right? Obviously, that one was kind of a wash, in my opinion. I mean, we both picked the Bucks to win that game, and they won pretty handedly. It was a close game in the first half, and then the Bucks, just caught fire, as they have been prone to do, in the second half of games, right? So, I mean, that's going to be the main thing is they're going to continue to win, or try to win games based off their offense. The Knicks just didn't have enough firepower to match. Even though you got a great game from Randall, I mean, he had 41 points, which again was probably easily his best performance of the year, right? I mean, 14 of 19 from the field, 2 of 2 from 3, 11 of 12 from the line. It just, you just didn't have enough. I mean, again, it was just the Bucks. I mean, when you're playing a team and they're hitting every shot, there's nothing you can do. 60 from the field, 60 from 3. I mean, there's nothing you can do. Like sometimes you
Yeah.
just kind of chalk it up to, just rough, just
Agreed.
rough it. Yeah, just rough times. Then also in the East, right? Celtics, Pacers. That I thought was a much better game. Obviously Porzingis was out, but the Pacers, they ended up, kind of doing what they've been doing the whole tournament, right? Obviously it wasn't quite as high scoring, a little under their average. But defensively, they were able to keep Boston in check. Mainly the Celtics just, didn't shoot well from three. Tatum
Yeah.
and Brown were pretty good in the first half. They kind of cooled off a little bit, the team as a whole in the second half. And again, like they just, the Pacers play a very fast, high paced style, right? Where they're launching a lot of shots, getting everybody involved. They shot 50% almost from three. And again, in a game like that where they only lost by a little bit, I mean, that makes a huge difference when you shoot 29% from three and the other team shoots 50% from three
Right.
almost. Tyrese Halliburton, right, continues to be awesome, right? 26, 13, and 10. Zero turnovers, right? Making all the big plays down the stretch. It's just impressive, just to see what he's been able to do, over the course of the season. Continuing to go in, right? Obviously, Pelicans Kings, right? That was kind of another game which was kind of interesting for a little bit. The Kings were playing pretty well during the first stretch of the first quarter. Then it was just a flood of turnovers, and missed shots, and then the
Yeah.
Pelicans took advantage and ended up kind of running away with it. Um, so obviously, it just, and I think the Pelicans have beaten the Kings 3 times, if I'm not mistaken. So it just seems like kind of a tough matchup. And now that the Pelicans have gotten, a lot of their guys back, they're starting to look better. We'll get into the next game that they played in relatively soon, but it feels like you're starting to see a little bit,
Yeah. I think they're
more
real.
from them. Yeah. Then moving on, we had another crazy game, Lakers Suns. Right,
Yeah.
this
This
one
one
was
was ridiculous.
yeah, 106-103. This was a game where the Lakers, for most of the first half, were in control. They were playing defense. I think the Suns had 10 turnovers in the first quarter, if I'm not mistaken, right? And I think the Lakers were up by about 12 at halftime, despite shooting absolutely horribly. And then in the third quarter, right, in the first few minutes, then the Suns basically battled all the way back, and then it was pretty much a back and forth game. Um, all the way right the rest of the way through, right? Obviously Durant, right? He had a great performance, 31, 7 and 4, right? Devin Booker kind of struggled in this game, right? The Lakers I think did a good job defensively for him, right?
Yeah.
And then LeBron ended up kind of being able to close out the game, right, with 31, 11 and 5, 12 of 25, 2 of 4 from 3. He's been shooting great from 3 this year. Reeves off the bench, right, kind of hit like a key go ahead shot. There was a controversial possession at the end of the game, right, where Reeves had the ball. He was getting ready to lose it, and LeBron called a timeout, and it felt like that it was a bad call. In the last 2 minute report, they stated that it was the correct call. But either way, it does kind of hurt if you're the Suns, like to be in a position like that. But Kevin Durant, at the end of the game, he also mentioned like, that's not the reason we lost. We just had long stretches where they just didn't play that great. They were able to battle back, but this would have been a really bad loss for the Lakers because again, I thought they were in control for most of the game. It was just they shot so horribly. I
Yeah.
mean, it was 37% from the field, 30% from three, even some missed bunnies at the rim, right? That's kind of what contributes to that bad shooting percentage. The Suns shot 49 from the field and 48 from three. So offensively, in terms of the shots, when they were able to get shots off, they were making them, but they had 27 fewer shots attempts than the Lakers, and part of that was because of the turnovers. They had 20, I think, for the game, and again, a lot of those were in the first quarter. But either way, right now the Lakers are 3-0 against them, and the Suns, they've still been able to play solid basketball. I think, despite not
Yeah.
having any of their guys, despite not having all three of their guys play at the same time. It does feel like a interesting matchup just because it seems like by the end of the game, it just seems like LeBron and AD can kind of do what they want around the basket. Whereas for the Suns, it feels like it's got to be like, they got to be able to hit these tough shots, and they can do that. It's just, again, by the end of the game, it is kind of a fatiguing thing, and it just felt like the Suns, by the end of the game, were starting to run out of gas a little bit. But I still thought it was a great, back and forth game. And once again, it's awesome to see LeBron and KD play against one another.
Yeah, I mean, like I share a lot of the same sentiments, but for me, I feel like the game was somewhat ruined when I was watching it live when that call happened. I thought it was a very, like you said, controversial call. I know some people are gonna have differing opinions, but I just thought it was so odd. I just didn't think that the game should come down to that. But at the end of the day, Devin Booker turned the ball over 7 times, 7 out of the 20, and then Kevin Durant tried to take the game-winning shot or game-tying shot. I can't remember. I think it would have been game-tying. And then he airballed it. So I mean,
Yeah,
there are multiple factors to the point where it's like, okay, yeah, the Suns couldn't defend really, but they were making their tough shots. But I thought that should have been a turnover on Austin Reeves, but it is what it is. I thought it was a great game. I enjoyed watching it. I watched it with a friend. We were amazed at the fact that Kevin Durant and LeBron James are even able to play at that level still in their older years. So yeah, and I love the environment too. I thought it was fire. Reminded me of the playoffs. So, hopefully we'll get to see that in season tournament be replicated year after year.
yeah, and then moving on now into this final stretch. We had the four teams that were left play. We're recording obviously the Thursday
Yeah.
after I guess these games have ended. But you'll be watching this on Friday, and it was between the Bucks and the Pacers, right, and then the Lakers and the Pelicans. So we'll start with the Bucks
Hmm.
and the Pacers first, right? So that game was 128-119 Pacers. This was a game where it was pretty back and forth early on. Milwaukee was up by two at the end of the first, right? But then after a while, the Pacers, they didn't shoot well from three in this game, obviously, and generally they don't win a lot of games when they don't shoot that well. They still shot under 50, just about 50% from the field, but still, eventually there was a stretch where the Bucks, were starting to kind of get a little bit sloppy. They weren't getting back in transition in terms of their transition defense. And the Pacers were just getting out and running. And like I think at the end of the first half, right, they were down by, if I'm not mistaken, 11 points, right,
Hmm.
13 points.
Yeah.
Um, and then in the third, right, the Bucks had a crazy third quarter, scoring 43 in the third, right, to get the game right back to them. And then once again in the fourth, right, it was back and forth, but Indiana ultimately closed it out, right? Tyrese Halliburton hit a couple of huge baskets late, right? He got a drive to the layup, or excuse me, a drive to the rim. And then he also hit a big step back three, over Brook Lopez, to
Yep.
basically close out the game.
With the
Um,
celebration.
yeah, with the Dame time celebration,
Yes, sir.
basically, and it's kind of interesting because again, I think this game kind of showcased, if I guess we can start with the Bucks if we want. Usually we
Sure.
start with the winning team, but it kind of showcases like the good and the bad with the Bucks, right? Because the good thing is offensively they can kind of get a lot of what they want at almost
Hmm.
at any time. Giannis at 37, 13 of 19, 11 of 13 from the free throw line, which is also good.
Yeah.
Um, Lillard had a third quarter stretch. By and large, I thought he was not that great.
Yeah.
Um, he made up for it, I guess, in the third, but in the fourth quarter he kind of slowed down, and then in the first quarter he was just bad.
Yeah, he hit a lot of
But
threes in the third, but outside
yeah,
of that, he couldn't really finish at the rim. There were a bunch of
yeah,
weird mid ranges and stuff, stupid
right.
fouls, stupid plays.
Yeah, Middleton, I thought had a solid offensive performance, right? He kind of being that third guy.
Hmm.
Lopez had moments where he was pretty solid. Um, you know, there were a couple of times, right, where they were playing some of those other guys like Beauchamp. He had a stretch where he was okay, but then in the fourth, right, it kind of,
Yeah,
fell by the wayside, right? Him and Cameron Payne,
yeah,
didn't
that
do a
was
great.
really bad.
Yeah, and that's kind of the interesting thing, right? Without Jake Crowder, they've kind of been forced into playing some of these other guys like Beauchamp. Um, I don't think he played today, but Andre Jackson Jr., right? He's played at times.
He played a
Um,
minute today, I think, but
yeah, exactly. So I mean, so in other
yeah,
words, yeah, not really
he
play.
didn't really
Um,
play.
yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the thing is that like it feels like that they're trying to kind of make up for some of the you know age issues, right, with putting some of these other young guys in, but at the same time, just defensively, it's been a problem. And you know, Halliburton is a guard where it's like, what is the best option for Milwaukee defensively to put on him, right? Because I mean, again, he does what he does anyways. I mean, the Celtics are a very good defensive team, and he had a great game against them. But just in general, for Milwaukee, right, the issue for them is who do you put on him, right? And they don't really have, really any guards that you're really comfortable with for long stretches trying to guard guys, right? Lillard's not great defensively. Beasley's not great defensively. And then the other guys, right? Like Cameron Payne, Beauchamp, I think is fine, but still, like, he can't be your only guy that's really capable of guarding,
Sure.
perimeter guys. Um, and that's kind of the tough part here. I mean, they were kind of forced into playing zone for a while, right? And, sometimes you can kind of tell, like, you'll go to zone when it's like, oh, we're not doing a great job, so we kind of have to slow that down. And it worked for a little bit, and then the Pacers were just able to get into the middle of the zone, right? Bruce Brown, Andrew Nemhart, right? They were just kind of
Yeah,
hitting flip
Oli.
shots.
Yeah.
Paint. And again, it's kind of funny because I don't think we picked the Pacers to win this game, if I'm not
I,
mistaken, or I think
well, we
no,
didn't even get to
it was
predict
the
this
Celtics. It
far.
was the Celtics. It was the Celtics one.
Yeah.
But I did kind of preface things with the Pacers by saying like they're the type of team that in a one game performance against the team, they could possibly, go all the way just by again, you're playing a different team each time. And if you have a hot shooting night, or a hot shooting stretch for a few games, like you could win it and pull it off. Um, so I mean, again, they've played, I think, very well in this tournament. Obviously, they haven't lost any games in this tournament. They add on to their, regular season total, which is nice.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think the championship game counts in the standings, if I'm not mistaken, because it
No.
would be 83.
Yeah,
Um,
it doesn't.
yeah, but either way, regardless, again, hats off to the Pacers because I mean they've been able to play some really good basketball. And this wasn't even like, in my opinion, one of their best performances. I mean, I still thought they played well, but you know what I mean. Like we've
Yeah,
seen
they
other teams
it wasn't
where they've
as like
gone
hot or efficient. Like even like
right,
Halliburton, like yeah, he shot 11 for 19, but he also shot 3 for 9 from three. So it's like, and they shot what 21% from the 3-point line in total this game. So we've seen them have very good surges of scoring, and that tonight just wasn't really one of those where it's like they were hot enough to like blow them out. But nonetheless, great game. And like I think it
yeah.
might be safe to say like Halliburton might be the best point guard in the league. Can we both agree on that right now? Because I mean the guy is averaging a bunch of assists and barely turning the ball over. I don't know.
I guess the question is so his competition, right? So
Sure.
if you look at the other point guards in the league, right? So
Hmm.
is Luca classified as a point guard?
I guess we
You
could.
think?
Might as well.
All right,
I mean, he has the ball in
Steph.
his hands like 90% of the time.
All right, so Steph is a point guard.
Yeah.
So, I think he's been playing pretty well.
Yeah.
Uh, so I mean, I feel like those two guys probably, if you were, like, I mean, I'm not saying that Halliburton isn't good. I'm just saying, like,
Sure.
you know what I mean? Like, I feel like those guys, are still, we can't forget about those guys.
I
Those guys
agree.
are still really, and
But
they've already, been able to accomplish some things.
I
But
agree.
at the same time, for this team, right, he's a great fit just because of all the different things he can do, and then also just because of the age. Like, he's probably not going to have too many nights where he's just kind of just out of gas. Um, so it's like, at this point, it feels like he's starting to clear some of those other point guards. Um, like maybe say like a Kyrie, when he used to be, when he used to play like the point.
Okay, what about
Um,
Shea?
Shea, I don't know. I feel like that's really close. I mean, like I think I would need to kind of see what they do once they get to the postseason,
Hmm.
to kind of, gauge which guy is over which one. But I guess with Shea, like we've seen a little bit more of him, like in a scenario where like last year, right, he was able to kind of get a team that just wasn't that super talented, right,
Sure.
to a play-in spot. We haven't seen that with Halliburton just yet. But he's getting there though. You know what I mean? Like he's
Yeah.
quickly starting to climb the ranks where I think like, he can if the Pacers continue to play well and they end up like a top 4 seed or something like that in the Eastern Conference, like, I mean, it's he'll be there, I think. You know what
Cause
I mean?
yeah.
He's ascending and I think that's the main thing. Um
Because
which
the
again
reason
is
why
kind
I
of
think he's like the best PG in the league right now is just based on the fact that he's playing the point guard position, the way that it was kind of created and the way that he's just following the
like
mold, a
right.
traditional
Like
point guard. So I guess to
yeah, like
reword it,
pure
he's probably the best traditional point guard in the league right now.
right. I think that's probably a
Yeah,
good one in terms of like yeah. And it's funny because like, even pure point guards, I mean like he's averaging what 26, 27 a game and historically, usually if you were averaging like double digit assists as a point guard, it was probably like, you were in like the teens maybe,
sure.
maybe 20 at best, but in terms of pure point guard, yeah, I think that's probably like, like you said, I think that's probably your best bet
Yeah,
because
because
especially
Steph's not really a point guard, like a true point guard. I think he's
yeah,
more like that shooting guard, scoring guard kind of guy.
yeah, he plays a lot more off the ball.
Hmm.
Um, and also like in terms of turnovers, right? He's also a very low turnover guy, and that's the other key as well,
Yeah,
right? Like that's kind of like the Chris Paul thing, right? At his best, where like he could get you like 10, 11, 12 plus assists a game, and barely have more than like a couple turnovers,
yeah,
right? And that's the cool part as well is like for Halliburton, he can score, right? High level score, and he can get you a ton of assists and not waste a lot of possessions, right? Because again, he's also a very pinpoint type passer
yeah.
where it's like not only can he pass well and see these crazy angles, he can get the ball to guys in these very specific spots. Like there was a play against the Bucks where he was driving to the basket and then he kind of improvisationally right kicked it out while he was driving to Obi Toppin in the corner and he catches it like perfectly and
Yeah.
hits the three.
Was that
And
the
like
one where it was like around the defender?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it was around the
Hmm.
defender and it was like very improvisational, like a very creative type pass where it's
Yes.
like that kind of stuff is where you can say like yeah, he might be the best pure point guard, like you said, traditional point guard
You're
in the
right.
league. Because and which is again kind of a one of one type because most point guards in the NBA are now more like combo guards, right? Where it's like they can, where like maybe they can get some assists, but they're primarily out there to score, right?
Yeah,
Like
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 Shea.
yeah, exactly like a Shea. I mean, he can get assists, but not to the degree of Halliburton.
Right.
Um, or again, like again, name a bunch of other guards, right?
D
Like I mean,
Fox.
yeah, De'Aaron Fox, Kyrie Irving, Lillard, like
Yeah.
a lot of these guys are combo guards, which feels like the archetype. But I mean, for Halliburton, it works. And again, it also helps that he's a great shooter. And he can do more than shoot offensively. He can get to the rim. I mean, he's shooting
Yeah.
52 from the field, 44 from three. That's gonna get it done. I mean,
Yeah, I just wanted
there's
to
not
show
much.
love to him because I know, a lot of the offseason talk about improvements and the team coming off of Team USA was all around Anthony Edwards, but I think we kind of got lost in the sauce with that one. And, we kind of didn't really mention Halliburton until he started actually playing in this regular season. So shout out to him for cooking up. But in general, I've really enjoyed this in-season tournament. I've loved the bench reactions. It really feels like March Madness, like
Yeah,
pre-March Madness, because, the environment is lit. Um, I was kind of curious. I guess we'll probably talk about it, in the next game. But the crowd seems very interesting. I couldn't tell if they were neutral or not. But then, in some games, I was like, okay, yeah, they're definitely not neutral. But what did you think of the presentation?
yeah. I mean, I like you said, I think presentation wise, you mean like in terms of like the courts and the crowd and
Yeah,
whatnot. Yeah,
yeah,
like I think that was pretty well done. I mean, the crowd, I think in the first game, it felt a little bit stale at times,
mm-hmm,
and some of that may have also been the time of the game, right? Because it was
true.
5 p.m. Eastern time, but that was in Vegas, so that was
Yeah,
like 2 p.m. over
yeah,
there. That's really early, for an NBA game. So
extremely.
I think that's part of it. Maybe you could also say like, Pacers, Bucks. How many people in Vegas are going to see that? I mean,
Right.
you would think people would want to see it, at the very least because of Giannis. But either way, I think the biggest thing was probably the time, right? The second game was at 9 o'clock or 9:30 or whatever it was. So there was a longer gap, right? 6 o'clock, 6:30 p.m on the West Coast.
Right.
That's a much more manageable time to get into a game.
Absolutely.
But it was also kind of interesting, that we kind of had a similar thing with the bubble, right, where it's a neutral site, where you're not in on the other team's, opposing court or
Right.
whatever. Like you're in, basically a hub area,
Yeah.
right, where like everybody's kind of just in there, just kind of doing their thing, and again, it's still high quality basketball.
Yeah. I really liked this game. I think this one was extremely entertaining. Do we have any like, takeaways for the remainder of the season? Do you think any of this stuff impacts the postseason potentially? Because I think, it doesn't I'm not too high on the Bucks as I was, earlier on. I think they're on my fraud watch list. But at the same time, they did have some surges where it's like, okay, yeah, you could see the extreme potential. Because, like you said, Chris Middleton, great third option right now. And then Giannis, he put up 37 points. And then Lillard, he has those times when he can hit the shots. I think he hit literally, what, almost three in a row, I think, because there was a time when he heat checked and he might have made it. I can't remember. But there are times where the Bucks look great, but then defensively they kind of just collapse. But then, now we've got young teams like Indiana where they're so poised and, efficient on offense. It's kind of scary to watch. So, does this change your mind on any of these teams, or are we kind of just where we were, last
Yeah,
week?
I'm still kind of where I am with the Bucks, where I still think they're going to be really good.
Mm,
I'm just curious, as I just feel like some of the matchups they'll need to watch out for, because I just feel like if they're going against a team with like a top tier or like close to top tier guard, that's going to be a little bit scary, just because they're not going to have any real options defensively
right.
for that. Um, but then there's other matchups where you may not be quite as worried about it. But at the same time, in the Eastern Conference, right, your main opposition is Boston, right? And obviously, their guards are a little bit different because, offensively, they're not in the same tier as some of the other ones, right? Like Holiday and Derek White. But you still have to worry about Tatum and Brown, and it's like they don't really have a great defensive option for those guys either, right?
Right.
Because I mean, like they're more athletic than your traditional like forward wings or whatever, right? Those guys are like upper tier athletes, especially Brown. So I mean, like that's kind of the issue there for them. But I still think it's a good team. And it's interesting where they mentioned like, in the fourth quarter it tends to be like where the defense, tightens up. And also their scoring also can be on a heater as well.
Yeah.
Because
For
they've had a
both of
lot of
these
games,
teams, actually, which is
right?
interesting.
Because the Bucks definitely have had a lot of games this season where like they were down by a decent amount and then just kind of came back. I mean,
Yeah.
we saw it in person when we saw them play the Wizards, right?
Literally.
Yeah, they had a game against the Blazers where it was a similar thing.
Hmm.
Where they've had a lot of these games where they've trailed by decent margins and then they've come back and they end up winning it out just because they can score at will.
And it's a
So
lot due to Lillard because I think at maybe last week he was leading the league in like most total points in clutch time or whatever. So he does score in the fourth like that. We can't take that away from him and the Bucks, but sometimes
right,
the
and then
defense isn't there.
right, and then it's interesting coaching wise where the broadcast they mentioned that they don't run the pick and roll as much as you would think with those guys. I think they mentioned it was like the 33rd most successful or something pick and roll combo, something like
That's
that. Basically, like
crazy.
yeah, basically on the lines of like they don't do it a lot, which is wild because again, like it shouldn't be that low on the list. Like I can understand if it's not
Yeah,
like quote unquote number one, just because they also do that with Lopez, but the fact that they don't do it like that
it should be top
frequently at
10 in
all,
my opinion, just with the
yeah, and it's
weapons you have.
right, and it's kind of interesting because after the game we got a report, um, from the locker room, right? I think it was Chris Haynes who put that out, right? That was saying like, Bobby Portis was, challenging, the coach Adrian Griffin, right? To be better after that in-season tournament loss, which is kind of interesting. I
Mm-hmm.
don't really feel like I've heard a situation like that before, like
Me neither.
normally, and also like their record is still good.
Right.
But I guess it also kind of goes to show like how locked in these guys are for these in-season
Yeah,
tournament
they
games.
care. You could tell.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wish the Bucks at times would care a little bit more about the transition defense, but like still,
True.
just in general. I
Yeah,
mean,
that was bad. Dame and I think it was Doris Burke who I think said it a couple times. Like Dame
right?
and Giannis back behind the free throw line, and then I think it was Obi Toppin was already down the court, and none of them went to the ball. That's
Yeah,
crazy to me.
there were multiple stretches where like the teams were scoring right after made baskets, and
You're right.
like they were just flying up and down the court, and it was kind of just wild to see. But either way, I think at least for the Pacers, the fact that you got, back to back wins, in a high stakes game, right, against two good teams, like that's also a good sign for the
Yeah.
Pacers that, like, hey, you have a guy late in games that can, get you, that can get you through these moments, right? Because Halliburton, seems like not seems like he is very high IQ, makes a lot of really good decisions. I mean, obviously, the 3-point shooting is very good, right? It wasn't great tonight, but just in general, you have a guy that can pretty much do, get you anything you need at the end of
Yeah.
the game, right? Whether or not it's a shot for himself or, like an easy open look for someone else, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's that's kind of the, cool part with the Pacers as well. I still think, you know, ideally you'd like to make a trade, you see if you can get another defensive minded guy, but they may not feel like that they're ready to do that yet. They may just be in the position of like, hey, we're young, we're a solid team, so let's just kind of keep rolling with what we got
I
and then
think that's
kind of
what
go
they're
from
gonna
there.
do.
But I do think, because we were kind of talking about the Pacers in our last episode, I think, where we were kind of like, revisiting some of the takes because they got off to a hot start, then kind of cooled down a little bit. But now, like I
Yeah.
said, in the in-season tournament, they got two pretty big wins. How much of that is the in-season tournament versus how good they actually are?
Sure.
We'll see. But again, just the fact that they were able to, have games where they didn't get completely demolished defensively.
And I mean, they
And they
knocked off two behemoths in the East. That's the thing that I think people are kind of ignoring is they just beat
yeah,
Milwaukee and they beat Boston. That's
right.
I think that deserves a round of applause.
Exactly. Yeah, and we know that in general they're going to also be able to beat a lot of those bad teams, right? Because a lot of those bad teams aren't great defensively, and they're going to light them up on any given
Right.
night. So I think with the Pacers, I think it's the team is a little bit better than even what we thought going into the season. I'm still not quite ready to say that they're like a contender, but they're definitely a team where it's like depending on who they match up against, they may have the chance to win a round. Like, let's say if it was like Indiana, Atlanta, or if it was like, Indiana, Brooklyn or something like that, right? I
Mhm.
mean, like they'd have a decent shot, I think, at being able to get out of that series. I'm not
Sure.
saying that they would 100% be able to, but I think that there are certain teams where like they could win a playoff series. It just kind of comes down to will they be able to at least get some stops come playoff time, which can be tough because again in the playoffs teams scheme a lot differently than they do in a regular season game.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's it's first to four as opposed to a one-off game. So that's the other factor as well. How much how much of their offense is going to be sustainable come playoff time. Because I mean, again, I think they're averaging 128 a game, and if that holds, I think they said that would be the highest in NBA history or
That's
something like.
crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, we're kind of in unprecedented territory, I guess, with that. So
Yeah.
we'll see. But I do think, because I liked a lot of what they did in the offseason.
Yeah, me too.
So I feel like it feels like that they have a really good shot at being a playoff team. Because
Yeah,
again,
they're putting it together.
because you look at that lower half of the Eastern Conference, and it just seems like they're not like any worse to me than any of those other teams. I mean, like I know Atlanta's missing Jalen Johnson, but I feel like they're on par with those teams, right? Like Atlanta, Brooklyn, whatever other teams you want to throw in there. I mean,
Cleveland,
like,
Miami, I guess.
yeah, I mean, that's how I feel. I mean, Miami, I still think when they're healthy is still probably, you'd
Yeah, I
pick
was
them.
just naming teams that were below them right now.
Right. Yeah, a lot of those teams, I feel like they could probably have a decent shot of being better than. I mean,
Yeah.
I would like to see what Cleveland does, like for a longer stretch when they have all their guys, but it still feels like they're not quite as good as they were last year.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, they
and
took
then
a
after,
step back
like
for
I said,
sure.
And then, like I said, after that, Atlanta, Brooklyn, I feel like they can probably top those teams, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then moving on, we get the next game, right, which was good for about 12 minutes,
Yeah.
15
One
minutes.
quarter.
Yeah,
One
one
quarter.
quarter, maybe a quarter and a half, and then after a while, it pretty much devolved into madness and chaos.
Yeah.
And that was Lakers Pelicans 133-89, so a 44-point drubbing. Um,
Yeah.
that was rough if you're New Orleans, because again, we just talked about before with them how it seemed like that they were kind of getting their guys back, they were getting things together, looking really good, and then they lose by a bajillion points.
Yeah.
Um,
It was bad.
yeah, so I mean, again, we'll start with the Lakers. LeBron 30 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds, 9 of 12 from the field, 4 of 4 from three, 8 of 8 from the line. So that's pretty wild offensive night. For him, he shot very well from three on the year. Um, I think he was at about 39% going into this game, so it's probably gone up a little bit.
Mhm.
And then after that, right, not like a crazy night for anyone else, right? Torian Prince went 5 of 8 from three. But outside of that, AD 16 and 15, 2 steals, 2 blocks. Mostly, I think most of his contribution was on the defensive end. I don't,
Absolutely.
a lot of that was kind of, I felt like, when the game was already over. D'Lo, right? I feel like kind of a similar thing. He got going early in the first quarter. Just he had a lot of turnovers. But outside of that, right? Austin Reeves had a solid night, but a lot of it was mainly the strength of their defense, right? It was twofold, right? They played great defense. They forced the Pelicans into a lot of tough shots, and then like some of the open shots that the Pelicans shot were by guys that you don't want necessarily taking them, right? Like
Right.
Valanciunas took 4 threes.
Yeah, that
You know,
was
so
rough.
yeah, I mean, like he's fine as a 3-point shooter, but again, that was about half of his shots, which is
Right.
not what you want. Um, Herb Jones 0 of 3 from 3. He's not a great outside shooter. Ingram was 0 of 3 from 3. He's not shot the three ball well this year. I don't think he's a bad 3-point shooter, but he's I think a little bit more comfortable from like the mid range and in.
For sure.
Zion 6 of 8, but again, only 8 shot attempts, 1 of 6 from the free throw line. So that's not necessarily great. And then, no one else really did much off the bench. Um, I mean, again, they scored 89 points. And I mean, like, keep in mind, that also includes the fourth quarter, which was completely garbage time.
Yeah.
So basically, that means, I mean, you're talking about through 3 quarters. I mean, that was like, what, 70 points?
About that,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, or no, actually, yeah, I guess, yeah, that's about right. So, I mean, like, in other words, that's pretty rough. I mean, I mean, that's kind of what we got to say. I mean, 36 from the field, 23% from three. I mean, that's not what you wanted to see if you're the Pelicans. I mean, again, I still feel like this is a solid team. Um, but at the same time, it still feels like, which I kind of thought going into the season, that they're still probably in that tier below, some of those contending teams, right? Where
Hmm.
it's like it's a good team. If they get the right matchup, they might be able to win a series, but I don't think they're probably good enough to be able to come out of the West. It just feels like it's a little bit too inconsistent, right? Because they've had some good games here and there, but then they've also had some, real weird games, some stinkers, and that's kind of why the record is what it is, right? Where they're 12 and 11, one game up from 500. Um, but I don't know. I mean, what did you think, overall of like, what you saw from the two teams in this game? Because
Yeah.
I mean, that was like if you're New Orleans, that was pretty bad. I mean, like I feel like they can be better than that, but at the same time, like I said, the inconsistency of the group I think holds them back. Because again, not a great outside shooting team, similar to the Lakers, but their offensive ceiling just feels a lot different, which is weird. Because like I mean, the Lakers aren't a great offensive team either so far in this season, but you also would say they have two superstars. So like there's still a baseline level where it's like as long as they don't shoot absolutely horrible, which they are very capable of doing, there's something they can do, and they can also hang their hat on defense. But I feel like the New Orleans team should be solid defensively as well.
I think
But
they normally are. But I mean, like, if we look at the takeaways for me, I would say I want to start with the Lakers. This was a LeBron James masterclass performance. Sometimes there's just times when you can't do anything about it, and I think that's kind of what happened here. But I don't really want to harp on the Lakers too much, but all I really have to say about them is great game from LeBron. And this is one of the things that I liked about this team was their defense. I liked the entire roster construction. It seems like they have a counter pretty much for almost every, kind of archetype in the NBA. They've got a guy who can guard wings and guards, in Vanderbilt. And then you've got LeBron, obviously, who can play some defense. AD, who's one of the top defenders in the league. So there are some guys on this team that can really defend. And I think that was the key. They really made New Orleans uncomfortable because a lot of the shots that, like you said, a lot of the shots that New Orleans took, I mean, were contested. I mean, I'm talking 1 foot mid range shots. It's like you don't really want to be taking those. You kind of want to get your
yeah,
feet set and just be able to catch and shoot. But they didn't really let
right,
them do that, and they ran them off the 3 point line a lot. But in terms of New Orleans, I think there were some positives to take away from this because you have to look at it. We've got to rewind back to when they played the Kings. They played the Kings, and I think they showed that they can be a formidable opponent. Especially when they have their guys back. But at the same time, you look here, you played everybody pretty much on the roster, right? But nobody really did anything. So that just tells me that it was a bad night, bad day at the office for them. Because I think we know that this team can be really good. You just got to see some more assertiveness, got to see some more leadership, and sometimes the ball just doesn't, fall through the net. And I think that's really what happened. But they also really couldn't stop anybody defensively.
yeah.
That's a big issue. You know.
Yeah, the transition defense was rough, and that's a young team, right? That's not
Right.
like a team with a bunch of older guys. This isn't like, say like a team like the Warriors or a team like the Clippers or something like that, right? Like
Right.
this is one of the younger teams in the league. Um, So it's just kind of weird to see. But yeah, I mean, yeah, sometimes you just chalk it up to an absolutely horrible, offensive performance. It
And I
is
think it
interesting.
shows their ceiling. One more thing. I think it does show their ceiling. I
Yeah,
think that New Orleans can beat a team, maybe say
right.
like Phoenix, the
Yeah,
Clippers, Houston, Sacramento, Dallas, maybe. But I think once they get to that Lakers, Nuggets, OKC, Timberwolves kind of tier, I think they're pretty much done for. But I don't know. I could be completely wrong in that.
yeah. That's kind of how I felt, and I felt that way going into the season. Where
Right.
I think it's a good team. I'm not ready to say it's a contender because I just feel like we haven't seen enough consistency from them yet.
They're
I mean,
close, though. They're close.
we'll need to see consistency like from like Oklahoma City and
Sure.
Minnesota as well. But also at the same time, like then when you look at New Orleans, like even their stars, right? Like Ingram has been really good this season. I feel like he's been their best player,
Agreed.
overall this season. But then it's like with Zion, I mean, like I would like to see, some other things from him, right? I mean, like 6 of 8 from the field is fine. But like, again, I'm at times like you're kind of disappointed where it's like he's not getting rebounds like that. I thought in the Kings game, even though he didn't really score, I still thought he had a solid floor game,
Yeah.
right? In terms of like playmaking, doing some stuff
And
off the
that's what they
ball.
talked about in
But
the
again,
pregame. Him actually making plays to Valanciunas and kicking out and things like that.
but then there's like other lineups where like yeah, like you can see the ceiling where against some teams it's not going to work. Like they had Zion at center, and it was basically just like a layup line for the Lakers to
Yeah.
the rim because he's just not a great defender. And not, like they'll make up for it by putting the other guys around him, like like a Trey Murphy or Herb Jones or
Yeah.
Jose
Who are great
Alvarado.
defenders.
Yeah, exactly. Those guys are good or very good defenders, but it's just, against that Laker team with the guys like LeBron, just kind of just getting to the rim where he's bigger than everybody on New
Right.
Orleans other than Valanciunas. I mean, that's just kind of a recipe for disaster. So I feel like, they're a team where I'm kind of intrigued to see what they do as we get closer to the trade deadline because they have a number of like decent pieces in terms of they have a lot of depth. Um, but I wonder if they kind of
Way too much depth, in my opinion.
yeah, exactly. And I kind of wonder if they decide, like, hey, do we decide to like maybe move a couple of these guys and bring in, like, maybe another high level guy, to help out the team. I'm curious to see what their mindset will be, just because again, they have a lot of guys. I mean, like you had guys like Jordan Hawkins who was playing a lot, when guys were out of the
Yeah.
rotation, and now guys are back. He's not playing at all.
Exactly.
Um,
And he touched the floor tonight for 12 minutes, albeit garbage time, but hey.
Right. So, I mean, yeah. So that again, like that's kind of how I feel, about the New Orleans team. Where, like I said, I just feel like you said, we've seen the floor and we've seen the ceiling, right? Like we've seen like, they're a solid team. They're like, again, I think it's a solid, good team. I
Yeah.
just don't think it's like a great team where it's like they can get out of the West. I feel like they need a little bit more, in certain areas. But
And it's funny, they were so good last year when Zion was on the floor, but I don't know. It's been a
yeah,
combination of things, and they've just
right,
been missing so many guys. That's the thing that hurt them. I think their record
right.
could be better than what it is if they didn't miss, if
Yeah.
certain guys didn't miss certain
Yeah,
amounts
because
of time.
they've definitely had some losses where like Zion and Ingram have been pretty healthy,
Yeah.
but they had like a couple of games where it was like, oh, Zion rested this game, and then they lost by like 3 or 4 points.
Right.
Where it's like, oh man, if he had played, they probably would have won that game. So that's the other factor that I think that you got to add as well, and that's where, like I said, I think it is a good team. I'm just not quite sure. I'm not quite ready to put them in that contender sphere.
Sure.
Even like a team and then it's kind of funny, like say where you look at the Lakers, where like they kind of started the season off not that great, um, but now that we've seen a few more games where they've gotten their guys back, now they look a lot better, mainly on the defensive end. And it's interesting because when we talked about them going into the season, we were kind of under the impression that it would be a more offensive oriented squad where they would probably take a step back defensively.
Right.
But that hasn't been the case, even though they're doing some 5 out stuff. They've still kind of been not great offensively, like they were last year. Although I think they finished, like when you look at the stretch that they finished the year on, like that, what was it, like 2 month stretch or whatever, they were a better offensive team than like the whole totality of the season showed.
Yeah.
But they're like I think a bottom 5 offense this year for the most part. Um, this was a game where, like I said, they shot the crap out of the ball, right? I mean, they basically shot like 50% from three, which they haven't done too much this season. And obviously that can make a huge difference, right? When you're not a great when you're not a great 3 point shooting team and you have a great shooting night, that helps. But then also like they can also hang their hat on the defense, right? So that's kind of an interesting thing because I didn't expect that. I expected them to be worse defensively, but they've been better than what I thought. And it seems like they're also kind of trying to figure out and decide which guy should actually play and get minutes. Because there were some guys who were playing earlier in the season, right? Like say like a Christian Wood, right, where we were talking
Yeah,
about him, closing games for the Lakers, and now he's not really playing at all.
right.
It's really it's Jackson Hayes. And then like again they still have like a Gabe Vincent, right, who is still out and hasn't really played a whole lot. And then it's like, well, whose minutes now are going to go away once he comes back? Because they didn't sign him just to have him play 2 minutes a game, right? Like he's going to play a lot of minutes for them. So I do kind of, I feel like they're another team where I think they will explore the trade market as well, um, just to see if they can, find another consistent guy, out there that can do some things offensively, and maybe like, can we get a backup big man that kind of does a mix of what Wood and Hayes can do, but they're just better,
Hmm.
um, or maybe like find another defensive guard to put out there. So I feel like there's some stuff that the Lakers can do as well, but I feel like they're in that tier, I think, above New Orleans, where I feel like
Yeah.
you feel better about them than New Orleans. Plus, again, the star power. Like I think LeBron and AD, that's just a better duo to me than Zion and Ingram. As good as Zion and Ingram are, I don't think they're as good as those two guys.
Yeah, and it's like the Lakers are one of those teams where it's like as time goes on, I think you're probably going to feel better and better about them. I know they're not, historically great recently, at the beginning of the season, but when you get closer to that middle area of the season, they seem to pull away. And that's kind of why I picked them to be, not a top 1 or 2 seed, but I picked them to kind of land in that 3-4 ish range because that's just kind of how those kinds of teams operate. They do get off to slow starts, pick it up, and then they prove to everybody that they are legit. And I think that's kind of what this game was for them. A statement game, big game for Braun, like we said. But at the end of the day, they're showing us that there is a skill gap in the NBA and there is a tier gap as well. So I think the Lakers are above, New Orleans. I know a lot of people were saying New Orleans was going to bully LA. That didn't happen. So, shout out to LA for that. And they'll be
Yeah.
moving on to, the finals for the in-season tournament. And I guess we should
So now
probably talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so now we got the final matchup, right? Whoever wins the in-season tournament
Yeah.
championship, and that's between the Pacers and the Lakers, right? So two very different teams, right? Basically,
Yeah.
in pretty much every way, right? Stylistically, right? The Pacers are a much more perimeter-oriented team, and they get most of their work done by, their offense, right? Again, we've talked about it. They're the number one offense in the NBA,
Yeah.
right? Whereas with the Lakers, right, they get their work done mainly on the defensive end, and then they kind of turn that defense into offense, right? Like their half court offense isn't great. Some of the stuff they do is fine, right? Like some of the pick and roll stuff, but by and large, right, if they're not playing great defense, they're probably not going to win.
Right.
Um, for the most part. But um, it'll be interesting because again, two different teams. Then the crowd is also going to be an interesting factor because you mentioned in the previous game, right? The crowd was a lot more neutral. I mean, I guess it was a little tilted towards the Bucks, but it was still pretty quiet. I think
Yeah.
for the
I mean,
most
they
part.
cheered for the stars on both teams. I will say that.
Exactly. Whereas with the Lakers New Orleans game, it was
Oh,
very obvious it was a much more Laker oriented game, and I knew that going in because it's Vegas, very close to Los
yeah.
Angeles.
Yeah.
When we went to Vegas for the summer league, right? Whenever the Lakers were had a summer league game, right? It was packed.
Yeah. It was all
Um,
gold. I couldn't believe
yeah,
it.
exactly. So that doesn't surprise me at all. I'm very curious to see these two teams match up because again, it's a very um, stylistically opposed matchup, right? Where
Yes.
again, you got like one of the best offenses with one of the best defenses. Um, right in terms of the star power, right? The Lakers have two stars and Indiana has one, but they also have another really solid collection of other guys. Where again, that if they have one of those games where they're just hitting everything, they can run you out of the gym. So I'm curious to see what LA does to slow down the Pacers offensively, but then I'm also kind of curious to see what the Pacers do with the Lakers, right? Because I mean, outside of Miles Turner, it's a relatively small team. They have some other guys, like they run a guy like Isaiah Jackson out there, but by
Right.
and large, they're running guys like Aaron Nesmith right at the four. He was guarding Giannis, for a good stretch of that previous game.
Did a good
So
job for, at some points making him uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, Giannis still had his way, of course.
yeah, so I'm very curious to see, how it pans out. I don't. This is like a 50-50 one where it's like I don't really know who to pick because, like I said, on the one hand, I feel like that the Lakers are a better team, but then at the same time, like in a one game environment, you could just have a game like we just saw tonight, right, where the Pacers just shoot like 80% from three,
Right.
the Lakers can't hit anything, and then before you know it, it's like a 20-point game at halftime, and the game is over. So
Yeah.
I don't really know who to pick. But again, like at the same time, you can't question that either of these teams want to win it, right? Because they're
Right.
here, they played hard in every game. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it's a really tough one. I'm kind of curious to, I'll let you kind of go first and kind of go
Okay.
over who you is going to win the game, but I don't really know which one to lean towards. Like I said,
Yeah.
if it was like just a regular game, then I would probably lean towards Indiana just because on a regular season night, like they're probably just going to outscore them. But at the same time, like a very fully engaged Laker team, it could be a problem because I think that there are things that they can do that could bother Indiana as well. But I kind of want to hear your thoughts first.
Yeah, and that's the tough part. They're kind of like the counters to each other in an interesting way. And I really want to say I want to rephrase that. It's more so that LA is kind of an interesting counter to Indiana because I think Indiana is, obviously one of the top offenses, if not the top. And then LA, they're a top 10 defense. They can do things that other teams can't do defensively. They can put people on Halliburton to make him uncomfortable, but at the same time, I feel like I'm confident enough in Halliburton to the point where he might be able to carve up this Lakers defense, and find ways to get the ball to guys where in windows where we don't even think are possible. And I think he might even be able to pull out one of those, 50, 40, 90 games where it's like he's shooting 50% from the field, 40% from the three, 90 from the free throw line with 15 assists. And I think that might be enough to put them over the hump. But at the same time, you also have to factor in Braun, where it's like, yeah, he's going to try. Like, we already know he's competitive. He's a fierce competitor. I think the entire Lakers team is a fierce competitor. I think they're a foe that you can't really trifle with. And that's going to be the problem. I think, a Lakers team where they're trying their hardest to win something. I think they're better than Indiana, but I'm going to take the underdog in Indiana because it just feels like Halliburton's going to give us a masterclass performance, even though I think LeBron is also going to play very well. But I don't know. I
Yeah,
just think offensively, the Pacers probably have a little bit more in the tank than the Lakers. I think there's more in the bag. I think they've got probably a few more tricks up their sleeve. I think that they haven't really shown us maybe against a top defensive team. But the problem is Indiana can't stop anything. That's the one thing that's really like making me teeter back and forth. Indiana cannot stop like anything.
because
So
the concern I think would be like, hey, the Lakers miss shots, but they have some guys where they can get some offensive boards, or they can get
Braun
like
and
a
AD, how do you stop them at the rim? That would be my
right.
question.
I guess like compared to the last couple of teams they faced, right? With like Nurkic and Valanciunas, right? Instead, it's Miles Turner, right? Who's a pretty good shot blocker.
Sure.
But then at the same time, right? Like he doesn't really have like another secondary like help support
Yeah,
guy.
it's not
Right, like
sustainable.
right. So that's the issue. I mean, like again, like even in this game, right? Like Giannis had his way, at the rim because again, like Turner at times was probably also at times on Lopez, and Lopez can shoot. AD's not really a shooter, so that's kind of different. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm gonna take
Like you
Indy
said,
though. I'm taking Indy.
yeah, I feel like I'm kind of with you where it's like in a one game scenario, it's probably going to be Indiana just because again, like, offensively, what they do is probably a little bit more consistent.
Right.
But at the same time, like again, there's definitely a scenario where like the Pacers, have like a night like in this game where like they don't shoot threes all that well, and then the Lakers just get stops and they get out and run with
Yeah,
Indiana.
that will hurt them.
Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna go down with the ship, I guess, and say Indiana.
Okay.
With
That's what
you,
I'm
but
doing
at the
too.
same time, but at the same time, I'm 50-50, where I
I,
feel
I
like it
feel
could
you.
be either way. You know what I mean?
I
Like
get
if
you
I'm
100%.
wrong, yeah, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong because it does feel like I still feel like the Lakers are just a better, like more complete team.
They're better.
It's just the offense just at times kind of scares me where it's like, you're you're a horrible shooting night away from like potentially, getting blown out. But at the same time, I guess they had a horrible shooting night the other night and still won. So
Yeah. That's the
uh,
tough part. But I think, I think the Lakers have kind of like not weird players, but players where they might be a little bit more prone to go cold than Indiana. I don't know, that might be a hot take, but there's
yeah,
guys like where it's like D'Lo. I think if D'Lo has a stinker game, I think that game is over probably because if D'Lo has a bad game, then you have to have a masterclass from Reeves too, and that may not be all that likely. So who knows? Also,
yeah,
I think Nemhart might be hurt as well. I know he's not like a crazy factor, but that may also factor into if they win or lose this game. But I'm still taking Indiana. I just feel like there's just something in the air with this team. I don't know. They just seem like the young next up kind of team. I don't know.
Yeah, the main thing for LA is they haven't really had too many games where both D'Lo and Reeves were really good. There have been
Yeah,
games where, like, one of them was really good and then the other was horrible.
right.
Uh, there have been games I think where both of them were not that great.
That's why one
Um,
of them was moved to the bench. So I get
yeah,
it.
yeah, and like even in this game, like D'Lo's counting stats don't look bad, but I mean, like,
He was the
I don't
reason
feel
they
like,
were close in the first quarter. We can just say
yeah,
that.
yeah, I don't feel like he played that great of a game. I think it was more so just he was kind of out there at times, like when they were, playing well, and like
He
because I
hit
mean.
his catch and shoots, and that's pretty much it. And the layups, but he turned the ball over and pretty much kept them in New Orleans in that game, which is not a good thing.
Yeah, so that's the main thing. Like I said, I'm kind of with you where I feel like on a in a one-off game, like Indiana probably has the advantage, but like I said, I'm 50-50
Because
on
who are
that.
you going to put
Like
on Halliburton? That would be my question. What's your count? What would be the Lakers' extreme counter to Halliburton?
probably gonna, I mean, in that starting group, it's probably gonna have to be Reddish because I mean, you can't be D'Angelo Russell.
I don't think
You
Reddish
can't.
is a good enough defender for that.
Yeah, I don't know because I mean, like he helped guard Devin Booker, but Halliburton is just a much different player. So it's
If
just like
Halliburton gets into trouble, he's gonna be able to move the rock
yeah,
to the point
yeah,
because Devin Booker, when he's doubled, we clearly see that he does get rattled and turns the ball over.
yeah, and that's kind of at times my concern with Phoenix, where it's like I just think it would be nice to, even if it's not like a starter, just somebody like that you can have to like just help kind of
Traditional
run the
PG.
offense and release possessions. That's the tough part. But like you don't need that with Indiana because you have Halliburton and
Nope.
like a TJ McConnell. They had three guards that they put in at different points, right? Like you had Halliburton for most of the game. You had McConnell in a few spots. And then, when he kind of tailed off, then they just put Nemhard out there
Yeah, when
before
he
he left.
traveled 3 times in a row.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing. I feel like they have more guys, I think, that you could just kind of throw out there where it's
Right.
like, oh, this guy could just kind of go off and have like a crazy, 15 to 20
Yeah.
point game. Whereas with the Lakers, I think like, through the first, 20 whatever games, I feel like some of those guys, like you said, are just a little bit more hot and cold, which again,
Right.
I think contributes to why their offense has been so up and down. But at the very least, it does feel like they're getting better because I think, like,
Oh
again, it
yeah, for
didn't feel
sure.
like they had much of an identity before and they didn't really know who to play. And now it does feel like they're getting some stuff together. So there's progress. And I think there's progress for Indiana as well.
Yeah.
More so just it seems like, now guys are getting more comfortable playing with one another and having their roles in lineups as well, right? Because at one point, Heald was coming off the bench.
Right.
Now he's starting. And didn't have a great game tonight, but
Yeah.
overall he's been a good player for them this year, which is kind of interesting because before the season started, there were rumors about him getting traded and wanting out, whereas now we're not hearing about that. Maybe he still gets moved if they can't come to terms on, re-signing him, but still, at the
Right.
very least, good to see that, he's playing good soldier and helping contribute to their wins.
Yeah, I've loved this in season tournament. I mean, it's just really, and it also helps like content creators and everybody out there because now we legitimately have something to talk about that people really do care about and the players are invested in. And I
Right.
think the hype is real. It's legit. So
Right. And
hats off to them for creating a sustainable W product.
yeah, we were on it where we liked the idea when it was first announced. I know some people were kind of mixed about it, but I think
Sure.
we just thought again it gives more meaning to the regular season at different points, and you can clearly see like these guys care about it, and if they
Yeah.
care, right, that makes for a much better product, right? Because we've seen in the past there are stretches in the regular season, where they call it the dog days of the NBA season,
Right.
where it's kind of like what like December, early January, where it's like a lot of teams just kind of just don't care.
It's
You know
the
what I
post
mean?
Christmas time or whatever. I
Yeah,
don't know. It's weird.
right. Like you have teams like that kind of have resigned themselves to being bad, so they've just given up. And then
Yep.
you have other teams that are good and they know they're good, and then they just kind of take their foot off the gas. So you
Right.
just get a very poor product, for that stretch, and that kind of starts to get to the point where people start to tune in a little bit more because people don't watch as much, in like October, November, but
Right.
as we get to December, January, right, more people tune in. So now it's cool to see that there is something legitimate to tune into. And again, like say for Indiana fans, right? Like, now they get to see a chance, to have their team potentially be in like a meaningful tournament thing. Same with the Lakers. And
Right.
other teams that were in the tournament that aren't in there anymore. So, I mean, like I said, I think they got a home run with this one. I mean, obviously, there's some things that maybe you might want to change.
Yeah.
But regardless, the base product that they have right now, that's a great starting point.
Yeah, I think the basketball aspect is great. I think some aspects of the presentation thing were great. I would say, a couple critiques. Can we never do that music thing that they did for NBA tip off again, please? Second, I'm not sure how I feel about the lighting in the arena. I like the focus on the court. I love
Right.
that, but the lack of backlights on the crowd is shady to me because it
Yeah,
makes it
that was
feel
weird.
it makes it I don't know what's really, not that I pay attention to what's going on in the crowd, but I'd like to kind of see the environment. I want to see, are there more Lakers fans here? What's going on? So that would probably be my only two critiques.
It made me question at times how many people were actually there. Where it was
Right.
just like, are there actually people in the arena, or is it like what it was
Right.
like in the bubble where they just brought out like
The crowd noise.
yeah, the crowd noise. Like I'm just
Right.
not sure. So,
Yeah.
um, what do you think about the actual Vegas part? Like, are you into the fact that like it's in Vegas, or would you kind of just prefer what it was before, where they're playing like at home or on the road, depending on who's got the better record or whatever?
Well, I think they're trying to mirror, the NCAA tournament. So I think having a neutral site works best for everyone. Whoever wants to go and support their team can go and do that. Um, and I think that's better because I think clearly that we've seen in the playoffs for as long as the NBA has been around, there is such a thing as home court advantage. So I think in a tournament, that's not really fair. I think, and that's why they do structure tournaments like this at every level of basketball, where it's a neutral site, where it's like, there's nobody has a clear home court or home field advantage in any sport. So I think that's the beauty in it. So I think I do like it in Vegas. I think I would like to see it moved around, year after year, maybe. That would be kind of interesting, where it's like, it just keeps moving and rotating, maybe to cities that don't have NBA teams, because I think at the end of the day, this is also a trial period where they could test, cities that don't have NBA teams and see if they're actually willing and able to sustain a team. And maybe we can get some expansions in. That would be kind
Yeah,
of like my takeaway from it. But yeah, I
yeah,
think I love the fact that it's in Vegas because it's neutral. And they're
yeah.
also trying to make Vegas, somewhat of a mini mecca for sports. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in Vegas, with the F1 stuff, the
Yep,
Sphere, UFC. There's a lot of stuff there. So
yeah. You
it's
already had
interesting.
summer league, so
Exactly. So they already know the
yeah.
market.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely like, I like it being, in Vegas. I hadn't thought about, what you mentioned in terms of like maybe it being in different cities each year.
Right.
I'm curious to see what they do with that. But overall, yeah, I think it was a good decision to have it at a neutral site because it just makes for, like you said, more of a tournament feel. Because like you said in NCAA, right, they don't play, like the championship game, at the home
That would be
team's arena.
unfair.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be too much. I
It
mean, like
would,
you got
no. Yeah, no.
15 plus thousand people, cheering or booing,
Yeah.
for whatever. Like that would be too
And
much.
it's like there would be no opposing fans in those arenas. So they got to keep it neutral just for it to be fair to every single person because, I mean, there's a lot on the line here. I think people um, keep forgetting that there is some
Yeah,
stuff on the line. A lot of
yeah. I mean,
money, a lot of, and see, this is the thing that people also are forgetting. This is the first one. So you go down in the history as the first team to win the NBA Cup. I know a lot of people are talking about it's a consolation prize, it's a dang participation trophy, but at the end of the day, it's the first one. This is going to go down in history.
that's that's kind of how you have to look at it. I mean, like you
Yeah,
can go back, and some of those guys might be able to hang it over, other guys' heads where it's like,
exactly.
hey, how many in-season tournament trophies do you have? Like
Look at what it will do for LeBron's legacy if he wins it. And I hate to be that kind of guy because I already know if he wins it, the headlines are going to be like LeBron James, this, da da da, and the inaugural, whatever. So it's like I do understand, but there are some people and some players that will never be able to win the in-season tournament because they're
right,
retired.
right. Yeah, how many in-season tournaments, can Michael Jordan win? He can't win any.
Exactly.
So
He's
it's
got
like,
zero, and he'll stay
yeah,
at zero.
exactly. So, I mean, yeah, I mean that's kind of how it is at this point. But yeah, it definitely seems like the in-season tournament has been an even bigger success than I think we thought. Because we were high on it anyways, but it's one thing to hear about it, but then to actually see it in action is
Yeah.
another thing. Where like how you can see how it works, what goes on in it. I still wish that they'd explained a little bit more, some of the rules, and the point differential thing was a little bit confusing.
Sure.
So maybe you change that. But either way, like I said, I think at the very least the starting point is very good, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, A plus, W, whatever slang or whatever
Yes.
term you want
Yeah.
to use. Yeah, 2 thumbs up, 5 thumbs up, whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's great.
It's great. Yeah.
So now news and rumors, to close things off, right? We got, a decent number of things, right? So obviously, according to the Athletic, right, Harden, he's been going around, with his interviews talking about, Daryl Morey said he would get the max. He thought he was going to retire as a Sixer. He's been, talking about it. Kind of interesting stuff. Um, Again, I don't know who to believe, because obviously, we've heard differing things from different groups, but
Right.
again, by and large, it is kind of interesting, how that situation ended. But obviously, it seems like for Philly, it's worked out, just because they've been playing really well. But again, like you've kind of taken the side, I think, for the most part, where you feel like, you know, Morey made a promise to Harden that he didn't keep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's how I'm
but
feeling.
yeah, so like, I guess I'd like to hear, more of your insight, in terms of what you think, considering, that's been your main position. I'm like I said, I'm not sure. I feel like there probably was the idea of like, hey, you take less money, we'll take care of you. I feel like maybe it might have been a little bit more performance based where it's like, if you play well and do stuff, then we'll do it. But I don't know. But
Sure.
what do you think?
And that's the problem with the he said, she said stuff because I think, the real truth is not going to come from either of these people. But I think, why would Harden do all this? Why would he go through all this? And I know I'm not going to like quote or cite, any of the stuff that Daryl Morey has done, but I know that he has had some shady dealings in the past where it's like, he's not one of the most savory people in the NBA in that position. Just saying. So it doesn't surprise me that that kind of behavior is going on. But like you said, I think it is probably more so along the line of, you do your job and we'll get you, what you need to feel comfortable here, yada, yada. And clearly he disappeared, in the playoffs last year. So that probably doesn't help his case. But regardless, if a deal like that was made and it's like, what he's saying, what Harden's saying that is true, then yeah, I don't think that's acceptable at all because at the end of the day, the players are human. You're messing with his money, and I don't think, anybody has the right to mess with anybody's money. So that's never a good sign and never something that you should do. So that's kind of just where I stand on it. I'm going to take the player's side because I think players do have rights.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good position.
Yeah.
Moving on, Celtics to be active in trades according to Shams. I mean, that's not really a surprise there. I think most of the teams, even like the top teams, are gonna, including Boston, right, are gonna be looking for
Yeah.
trades. My guess is it's probably more of a minor one. To shore up that depth, maybe to get another key piece. I mean, they don't have like a ton of big contracts to move. I guess, or yeah, they don't have like a ton of mid contracts to move, right? Like, I mean, I guess Derek White, but they're not gonna move him.
Right.
But other than that, right, like Al Horford, Peyton Pritchard, he signed an extension, so I'm not sure when he would be eligible to be traded. Um, but again, like you don't have a ton of options. But I mean, like, if you're the Celtics, what do you feel like they should primarily target? I mean, like I think, maybe you'd like to have another option as a big, so that way it's not like, Horford or Porzingis, maybe like a more of like a bouncy athletic guy. But it does seem like they prefer to have those floor spacing bigs. I'm thinking like more of maybe like another additional backup forward,
That's what
just
I
so
was
that
going to say.
have like a guy that can play next to either Tatum or Brown, in one of those other smaller lineups. But I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking more of a backup wing, maybe more of a power forward that can maybe, fit into that center spot. That can also maybe space the floor a little bit as well, because I don't think, not to say that Sam Hauser is bad or, the guys that they've been playing are bad, but, you can clearly see that the roster does have its limitations, especially with Porzingis out, so that doesn't help. But overall, I think Boston's in a good spot to be comfortable. They're
Yeah,
not in, any danger zone areas or anything like that. But I think, it never hurts to change something up sometimes. And I think they'll probably be one of those teams, like the rumor said, they'll be active. And, you should always look and weigh your options because I think, if you can put together a small little package and get an impact guy back, I think that could do you some wonders in the playoffs potentially.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. Just again, another guy that you can put next to Tatum and Brown,
Yeah, exactly.
to help you out, so that way again those guys, have to play like however many minutes, and then like most of them are going to be, together. Like if you can have like maybe a 2 or 3, minute stretch, right? Where like, one of them is out, but like, the other guy is next to somebody who's a relatively competent wing. That I think will help.
Yeah.
Next up, Carmelo on his podcast, so he is 7 p.m. in Brooklyn. He mentioned that the Pelicans gave him a call, after his retirement.
Really?
Uh, or yeah, basically, I mean, kind of an interesting thing, right? Because obviously he retired. He wasn't signed by anybody in the offseason, so I don't want to say it was kind of a surprise, like, but it's just kind of interesting, right? Where we never heard anything about like a team thinking about signing him. He just kind of retired. He also said he got interest from China, but I don't know. I mean, like, do you feel like he still would have been able to help a team like New Orleans? I mean, he played for the Lakers and he wasn't bad. Obviously
Yeah.
he was older, couldn't really help you defensively, but again, he definitely can shoot. And I guess he, in New Orleans could always use another shooter, but maybe you could also say like they might have preferred a younger guy, right? Like a Trey Murphy. Obviously is playing pretty well for them. As a two-way guys. But I mean, either way, like, what do you think? It's
I
kind of an
mean,
unexpected.
yeah, that's weird. I didn't even know anything about that one. But I mean, it probably wouldn't have hurt them too much. It's not like, he would have been playing, 30 minutes a night or anything like that. He probably would have been playing like 10 or maybe even less. But I think they did do a great job of improving, the shooting on the team. They did bring in Jordan Hawkins, which is a great pick, and he was shooting lights out numbers for a rookie. So I think they did find what they needed. But that would have been an interesting, like, I guess, quote unquote, contingency plan. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I mean, to have Melo on the team, I think at any level would have been pretty cool, even for China.
Yeah, and then moving on, De'Aaron Fox rejected 2-year, $105 million
Yeah, I heard
offer.
about
De'Aaron
this.
Fox turned it down, according to Chris Haynes. Kings contract offer before season and hopes to make All NBA and earn more money. That makes a lot of sense. I think
Mm-hmm.
he's in a very strong position to get All NBA
Yes.
once again.
Yep.
Obviously he'll need to make sure that he gets to 65 games. Um, but either way, assuming he does, I think he'll be on his way. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of really good guards, but I think there's like a few where it's like they've fallen off a little bit. Like, say like a Donovan Mitchell. Not that he's been playing bad, but I don't feel like he's probably going to get there.
He's not having an
Um,
elite season. Simple.
right. There's some other guys, right? Like, who are playing really well, but some of those guys were already on the list, right? Like Luca was already there, Shea was already there. So I feel like Fox is probably going to be there again. Although we'll see, because Halliburton, I think he's going to get on that list.
Yeah.
And take one of those guards' spots. But if he swaps spots with Donovan Mitchell, right, then it's not really going to make much of a difference.
Right.
And now it's positionless, so you could have like 3 guards, on the All NBA first team. So
Yeah.
if that's the case, I feel like he's probably going to get on there, and that makes a lot of sense, because again, if you get on All NBA and you get the supermax eligibility thing, then you're going to take that, and I think he can get there because again, he's been pretty durable. So I think he's going to play enough games, and I think he's going to put up the numbers. And assuming the Kings stay, like in a decent seating
Afloat. Yeah.
spot, like he's going to get it.
Yeah, I think so. We've talked about him. I think that was one of the biggest surprises and, good surprises was, the fact that his gameplay has taken a crazy
Take
leap.
it.
He's put together the jump shot while also scoring and driving efficiently. So, you love to see it, and I think he'll probably get that, and I don't disagree with that at all. And I think, if when push comes to shove, I think he should be on the list. I think somebody's got to go.
Um, Kyle Lowry said that he will retire as a Raptor. He confirms his plan is to finish his career in Toronto. So I don't know if that means like he'll, eventually like, when his contract is up, go back to Toronto, or if he'll do like the thing that some of those players do where they do like a 1 day, kind of like a,
Right.
celebratory signing. But it makes sense, right? He's been talked at times as like the greatest Raptor ever. Obviously, he was a part of that championship team, and a member of like other Raptors teams that didn't win a title, but were good teams. So
Hmm.
I think that, I think he means a lot to that organization just in terms of like, the fact that he was kind of able to help get them, back from, a team that was kind of a joke or that was a joke, to a team that, every year was a solid team and then eventually won a title. So
Yeah, him
that's
and
a lot of,
DeRozan. I mean, they were the building blocks for the Raptors that won that championship. The Kawhi trade. Everybody has their feelings on that. But regardless, it is what it is, and they won the championship. And hey, that's just the sad reality of business. Sometimes you just have to leave. But uh, I don't think there's any bad blood between the him and the organization. Clearly, it's not. It's not anything bad. So I think I'm happy for him. I think that's great. If you have the privilege and opportunity to do that, I think that's really cool, special.
Do you think he's a Hall of Famer?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think so too.
Just due to the longevity of his career, he's done so much for a lot of teams. And he's never been really a bad player. I think he not revolutionized the game, but kind of shook things up for a little bit. He's a solid rebounder for a long time in his career. Eventually got the shot together, the assists. He was never one of the quickest guys, but I think his play style was very unique for his time. I think he was a little bit ahead of his time, honestly.
Took a lot of charges, pretty
Right.
physical.
Yeah.
Has also kind of the reputation as kind of like a like a flopper type guy, but
Right.
either way, again, I think he was a really good player.
Yeah.
From and again, he's still helping the Heat win at times. So we'll see
Yeah.
where that goes. But yeah, I definitely think he's a Hall of Famer. Like you said, the longevity combined with the numbers and all that. Yeah, I mean, like you
Yeah.
kind of he's really good. I mean, that's
Yeah. He's
kind
a
of
champ too. So.
exactly. So I mean, you don't have to be a champ to be a Hall of Famer, but
Right.
just the fact that
That
he
just
was a part.
adds.
Yeah, yeah. The fact that he was a part of a championship team while also putting up great numbers. I mean, that's an easy case I think for Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Next up, bidding interest on expansion teams. LeBron and others seeking ownership of new NBA franchises. Right. So obviously, we just kind of talked about, when we were talking about the in-season tournament, being in Vegas, right? The possibility of some expansion teams, and that's going to happen.
Yeah. It's
Eventually,
happening.
we know the league is going to expand. We know that there's going to be groups that are going to be interested, in purchasing that, right? So I know they talked about Fenway Sports Groups, right? They've kind of expressed interest in it. Obviously, LeBron's talked about it, and he's got a lot of money. So I mean, I guess the main thing is like obviously where do you think, ideally, like, the NBA is going to expand? I think we already know, like, in terms of like Vegas and Seattle, I think are kind of like
Sure.
the hot ones. But like outside of that, because I think there will be more than two. I think they will start with two, but I think eventually they'll probably get to like, maybe three or four, maybe.
Right.
We'll see how it goes. But outside of Vegas and Seattle, what do you think are kind of like some ideal hot spots, for expansion teams?
Yeah, I would say one of them is Baltimore. I think that's a good area. They do have the Ravens. I think they've built up an economy down there. So I think that's a good starting point. And another one would also be maybe one of the another Canadian city. I think that would be kind of interesting. I'm not really too familiar with Canada, so forgive me, but I don't know any of their cities off the top of my head.
You got
Um,
Vancouver. I mean, you got
yeah, exactly. I don't know. Is Ontario a city there?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So like maybe like Ontario or Vancouver, one of those teams or one of those cities. I think that would be very interesting. I'm trying to think of another team that would be pretty or another city that would be pretty entertaining. Maybe like a St. Louis or something like that. I don't know because I do know they have a decent amount of arenas or something like that. So
Yeah, I mean, again, there's been a lot of different areas, that have been mentioned, over time. Obviously, it always goes back to Seattle and Vegas. But yeah, I think that those are, interesting cities, and it'll be kind of cool because once those expansion teams get in there, then you'll be able to, I think, kind of reorder some of the conferences, right? Like, say like a team like a Memphis
yeah, it needs
or
to
New
go to the
Orleans.
east.
Yeah, they're in the West, but nobody would ever call New Orleans or Memphis like West Coast. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like I mean, Tennessee borders, Virginia, right? So
Right.
like, I know Memphis isn't at that part. I think it's more like Western Tennessee. But either way, like any state that borders Virginia is
Yeah.
not a West Coast team. And then like like New Orleans, right? Obviously that's in the South, but like again, it's near like Alabama, Mississippi. So I mean like, it's just yeah, like
I've
that.
got
That would be
I've got some
kind of
more. Like I know with the Lakers and stuff and the Clippers, I know they're both LA teams, so there might be an opportunity for another city outside of LA to have that. Maybe Chicago. I don't know. I'm trying to think of other cities, maybe like a Mexico City, something to rival down there in San Antonio,
yeah.
something like that. Pittsburgh,
Yeah,
maybe. I don't
yeah.
know.
They
I'm just
already
kind of throwing stuff out, like Tampa.
yeah. Yeah, they already have a G League team I know in Mexico City,
Right,
right?
yeah.
They're
And they have the
maybe kind
games
of
that they do down there too, right?
yeah, do the games down there as well. Over the course of the season, right? There's usually like a matchup or two down there. So
Right.
I think that's probably the case because I like in terms of like other countries. Mexico and Canada are probably like the limit, just because the further out from there, that's just probably too much in
Yeah, the
terms of travel.
travel. No,
Yeah, like you're
no
not gonna
shot.
have yeah, like you're not gonna have an NBA team in like Johannesburg or
No, no, no.
whatever. Like you're not
They
gonna do
should
that.
do games overseas. I think that would be very cool. Kind of
Yeah,
like how the NFL does,
yeah,
but they've
because they
already
do
got
that.
the global reach.
Yeah, because they do that in the preseason.
Right.
But they don't do that, in the regular season because
Right.
I just think the travel is too much. But and then people have also mentioned other areas, like I think, like like a Nashville.
Yeah, I think that was the one that we had talked about. It was months ago. Like it was a
Yeah,
long time ago. I think I had mentioned
yeah,
that.
right. And I know the WNBA. I think they're doing an expansion team. I think in San Francisco
Hmm.
because I think that's tied to the Warriors. Obviously we have an NBA team in San Francisco, so yeah, I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of options.
About like
Um,
San Diego or like Louisville or something.
Yeah, I think the Clippers used to be in San Diego
Okay.
way back in the day.
Got you.
So and that's the other kind of that thing that's kind of interesting is that some of these teams, used to be in other areas, like
Yeah,
you mentioned.
Vancouver
Even like
Grizzlies, right?
yeah, like they were in Vancouver, or say like even the Wizards, right? Like they used to
Oh
be in
god.
Baltimore.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Baltimore
yeah,
Bullets. Yeah, fun time.
or yeah, or the Lakers used to be in Minneapolis. So I mean, like
True.
there's a lot of different histories there. So I think that there's a lot of good options there, but I feel like it definitely starts with Vegas and Seattle, just
It
because we've
has to.
heard that so many times, where it's like that's the obvious. I think
And we've already
first.
seen Seattle have a great fan base up there too. And
Yeah,
then, Vegas, we already talked about Vegas. So I think it's great. And I love it. Like, I love theory crafting on all these cities. Like, I loved it. It's pretty cool.
yeah, yeah. Maybe at some point, maybe we'll see an NBA team in Juneau or something like that,
Hey,
or Honolulu.
yeah, that would be interesting. But travel,
Probably.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean in 2K you can do it, but
Okay, I got
regardless,
you.
um, moving on, Pistons want to keep Bojan Bogdanovic. So kind of an interesting thing how we got two rumors not that far apart from each other, right? One where it was like last season they had an option to give to get two firsts and they didn't take it,
Sold.
and then now rumor from guess SNY, right? Like basically saying like, oh, now they don't want to trade him. So I mean, I don't know. That's kind of weird. I mean, in my opinion, I understand like keeping some of the veterans on the team.
Sure.
And I think like it was from SNY because it was tied to like, oh, the Knicks could trade for him, right? Like I'm guessing maybe like you could do like, oh, Fournier for him or something like that. But I don't know. Like that Pistons team, we've already talked about it. It's bad. It's awful. It's the worst team in the league right now. Even worse than like a team like the Wizards, where it's like the Wizards record wise are pretty similar, but with the Pistons, like they haven't won a game in months,
Right.
years possibly. So I mean, need to kind of figure out what they're gonna do, move some of those guys. You don't have to move every single veteran, but this should definitely be a team at the deadline that is a seller. I know
Yeah.
they went into the season with playing expectations, and I thought they'd be better, but I still didn't think they'd really be good. But I didn't think they'd be this bad. So I mean, like
Yeah.
we'll see what they do. I mean, that would kind of suck if you had the opportunity to get something back for Bogdanovich and then you end up just keeping him because you were too hesitant to give up on him. That would be
That wouldn't be worth it.
that'd be a horrible decision by the front office. If that's the case, if they were actually offered two first and they didn't take it, I mean, I think Detroit Pistons fans should be rightfully upset about that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what to tell you. That's just a bad decision. Like, if you get two first for an older guy, if a team is actually willing to give up two first round picks for an older player on a decent contract, like, you take that. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
come on.
I mean, that would be
And
like the
now,
equivalent of like throwing Gallinari in there for like 2 first-round picks. You're a madman if you don't take that deal. Just
not
saying.
like and it's like, I get that he's good. Is he gonna help Detroit win more games? Doesn't
No.
seem like it. I mean, now he's starting and Asor Thompson comes off the bench and doesn't even play a whole lot. So it's like
Yeah.
I have no idea what's going on over there. It's
I
feel
don't
like I
know.
said, I'd
And
be
then
afraid
Duran
for
is out for like 2 weeks now too.
yeah, yeah, Sham said that yeah, Jalen Duren's gonna be out for a few weeks. I mean, it's getting pretty bad,
Yeah.
over in Detroit. Like there was a lot of optimism I think going into the season, but like that has been
Because
completely
on
wiped.
paper they're supposed to be like pretty good. I mean, you got Cade, you got other guys. I mean, they look like a good team in terms of like the paper and the roster structure. But then when you look at how they get on the court, I mean, it doesn't translate at all. And Monty Williams, that doesn't even look like that was a good decision right now. It might be too early to like we might be jumping the gun there, but I mean, he doesn't look like he has a solution.
Yeah, I mean, $80 million, potentially up to 100 in terms of incentives. I mean, like
Yeah.
that's it's not looking great. I mean, we'll see, but I mean, will they ever win a game again? I mean, like they have to at some point, but win because I mean,
I
like
think if they play the Wizards again, I think they have a fighting chance.
yeah, because I mean, like the games that they play, like they got Orlando, they got Indiana, they have
Okay.
Philly,
Okay.
Milwaukee,
Okay. They're not
Atlanta.
winning
I
any of
mean,
those.
they may not win a game until like the end of the year potentially, not the end of the season, but like like the last week of the year. Like I think they play the Jazz on the 21st, so maybe that's a winnable game. But then if you don't win that, right? Brooklyn, Boston, Toronto. I mean,
Yeah,
like
I mean, those don't sound like winnable games, in my opinion.
yeah, I mean they've lost 18 in a row. I mean, like they might get to that, you know, what was it like 23 or something straight loss. They might break that record potentially. I don't know if they will, but they could. I mean, like cuz that schedule is not an easy schedule. Like I'd be surprised if they won any of those games unless like a team is just like super shorthanded.
And
I
they're
mean,
not
like
doing it on purpose.
right,
Like
like
this
the
draft
other
is not worth it to do that
right,
on
like
purpose.
like the other night, like the Blazers, they haven't obviously been very good, right? They almost pulled a win off against the Warriors,
Yeah.
but I mean, even while they didn't have all their guys, so maybe you could get a Detroit game like that. But then, like even then, like I don't know, they might they might get to like 20 plus straight losses. Like it feel I don't know when they're gonna win again. Legitimately, I legitimately don't know. It could be another several weeks. Like they haven't won a game since October. We're almost midway through December. I mean, like
There's no way they go into 2024 without a win.
that just sounds awful. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's bad.
yeah, like I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I mean, hopefully they've been good and maybe Santa will gift them a win. But like,
Yeah,
jeez,
that's what
I
they
mean,
need. They need to put 5 W's on their Christmas
yeah.
list.
Um, Next up, it sounds like the Bulls they want to keep Alex Caruso. I mean, again, I think some of this kind of just stems from the fact that like he's a solid player. They don't want to just give him up for nothing. But I don't. But I also am like, what is the stopping point in terms of how much would a team be willing to give up to get him, right? Like we saw, at last season's trade deadline where you didn't see a whole lot of teams giving up like a ton of first round picks. Like I know that there was like a thing about Chicago thinking they could get two first for him. I don't think they're going to get two first for him. I mean, we
Mm-mm.
saw, you know, some trades last year where it was mainly second round picks for guys that are like, in a similar ish tier, right?
Right.
Maybe worse. Still, just in general, like, if you couldn't get, like the Lakers were able to get rid of Russell Westbrook and bring in guys, multiple players for one first.
Right.
So I'm like, like if you can't, so like if that's the case, I'd be pretty surprised to see if a team was willing to give up multiple firsts for Caruso.
I
Maybe
don't think
one.
he's even really worth one. I think he's worth, maybe 2 seconds in another player, something like that. I don't know.
I mean, I could see maybe a team giving up like a protected first,
Right.
but I'd
Yeah.
be surprised if it's because again, I think he's a good player,
Yeah,
especially
me too.
defensively. But at the same time, like I just don't see a team giving up like a crazy amount,
Agreed.
to get him. But at the same time, that's going to be kind of the interesting case with the Bulls, where we know that they need to move some of these guys. I don't think they will move all of them. Even a guy like a Levine, I just feel like there's not a whole lot of interest because I think the combination of the contract. Now he's going to potentially be out. Well, not potentially, will be out for at least a few weeks,
Hmm.
right? That kind of puts him right at that January stretch where, like, oh, now anybody can trade anybody that they've signed. Um, so like just in time, for the trade. So we'll see what happens. But um, at the very least, again, like his contract is the easiest to move, but also like the easiest one to keep if you don't see anything. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because it's
Yeah.
just like there will always be somebody that might be interested in trading for him. But like I said, I just don't know if a team's going to give up like a crazy amount. Because again, like we saw at last year's trade deadline, there wasn't a whole lot of like crazy moves where like, oh, this team gave up like, two first round picks. Because we heard at the beginning of the year, because I already mentioned the Westbrook thing. At the beginning of last season, the conversation was always it takes one first to move Westbrook and then another first to, get stuff back for him. And even like when we talked about like, with Gobert, where it was like, man, Gobert was moved for all these picks. So how many picks is Durant going to get moved for? And it was a lot, right? But
Yeah.
again, that's Kevin Durant, right? Versus like Alex Caruso, right? Like Durant was like what, like 4 or 5, picks or however many it was. I can't remember how many it was,
I
but
think it
like,
was 5.
yeah. So like, if that's the case, I don't see how Caruso's going to get moved for two firsts. That's
No,
just,
it's not
I
equal
don't think
value.
yeah, so I mean, again, I think there's a lot of teams he can help. We've already talked about it. He could help out a team like Milwaukee for sure. He could help out a team like LA, either LA team, honestly.
Yeah.
He could help out, even a team like a Boston, right? Like just to have another guard. I don't think they need another guard necessarily, but
Mm-mm.
again, he can fit in and slot in. I think to a
He
lot
can
of
go
teams. Or like a
anywhere.
Denver.
He can go
Yeah,
to any
Denver.
contender.
Yeah, he could go to any contender and slide in, and he could easily play like 20 whatever minutes a night, and
Yeah.
potentially close games for you. But again, is that a guy you're going to give up a ton to get? Like, I'm curious to see what the bidding price is for him, because like I said, I
Especially if
think.
you're already good. No, you don't really quote unquote need him.
And then, last but not least, or not last but not least, we got a couple more, right? The Knicks are star hunting. Did I already say that one? Okay, all right. So cut that part. Um, yeah. So the Knicks are star hunting according to Shams, right? Where it
Okay.
sounds like, again, kind of like, I guess, in a similar way in terms of the Celtics being active in the trade market, the Knicks, I guess, will be active in the trade market, but instead of small pieces, right? It seems like a star, right? They're waiting for some star to be disgruntled, and then they can jump in, and it makes sense. They have a lot of things they can give up. They have some young players. They have some picks, right? So they have a lot of different things they can give up. Obviously, maybe if a team's willing to take Randall or somebody like that, I don't know. We'll see. But um, is there like an ideal player that you think fits the Knicks? Um, or is it like in terms of, it doesn't have to be a specific player, but like a specific player or some archetype? Because I feel like it is like just another guy um that you can reliably give the ball to create some good offense for themselves or others. Because again, it feels like it's primarily Brunson, because I don't really look at Barrett as much of a creator. I think he's more of a finisher.
Hmm.
And then, Randall can make plays at times, but it's just a little bit too inconsistent. So, I mean, like I said, I think archetype wise, are you kind of in on that too? And then, like,
Yeah.
at time, what player do you think kind of fits the bill, or or maybe you don't think there's a specific guy?
I mean, it's kind of tough because I think we can both agree that we're looking for the Randall replacement. But who would really replace him would be my question, and I'm also not sure who the really disgruntled stars are yet. I think right now it may be a little bit too early to tell. But maybe say Toronto wants to move on from Siakam. Maybe that's a good move where it's like Siakam could go to New York. And I think that's a guy where you can give the ball to him. He may not be able to shoot threes as much, but he could still get to the rim, finish. And he's got a bag on him. I think his bag is a little bit more reliable than Julius Randle's. And I think that would also be a better fit, with R.J. Barrett and Jalen Brunson. But at the same time, I just don't really know who else is uncomfortable in their position right now. That's a star,
The issue for Siakam is he's just not been shooting well,
right?
uh, at all this year, right? And I mean, like, we talked about it before, where it's like, we like him on some of these teams, but then the issue has been like, he's not a great outside shooter. But like this season, he's shooting like 20% from three,
Right.
which is pretty bad. I mean, like, again, that's kind of the scenario where it's like you're gonna be left open and nobody's gonna guard you from the perimeter. And he's a guy that likes to play with the ball in his hands. And again, if he's not the number one guy, maybe that'll be relatively fine, because then it's like you have other guys that can kind of make up
Yeah,
for it.
that's
But
what I was thinking.
yeah, but either way, I would like to see him ideally get his 3-point shooting back. I mean, career wise, he's 32%, so he's never been like a great outside shooter. But he did have a couple years, right? Like the championship year, he shot 37% from three, and then the following year, right after Kawhi left, where he was an All Star, he shot like 36 from three.
Right.
But in between those, right, like the year after that, right, 29%, right, and then after that, 34%, right, 32%, and now 21%. So, again, it seems like that 36, 37% was more of an outlier. And that's kind of what happens when you have like guys that aren't like 40% 3-point shooters. And in general, like 3-point shooting is high variance, but it seems like he's never been a great outside shooter. So, if he can get it back, that will certainly help. But again, we'll see. But I still feel like he's better than 20%. But he's still not a guy that I think teams are scared of behind the 3-point.
Right.
It's all around it's all from mid range and in.
Yeah,
But I
agreed.
do like him. I think he's a really good player that can help
Yeah.
out a lot of teams.
Yep.
Um, and then to answer that next question, for our final thing, according to again Stefan Bondi, right, for the New York Post, right, the NBA is waiting on a Mitchell trade. League has its eye on whether the Knicks take a swing at Donovan Mitchell. Now, I mean, obviously he's been long, before he was traded to Cleveland, obviously there were all the rumors about him going to the Knicks. Like I remember last offseason, right? Like all we heard was, oh, no other trades are happening because we're waiting for the Durant trade and then we're waiting for the Donovan Mitchell trade to the Knicks, right?
Right.
Like, and then Durant trade happened, but way later,
Right.
right? The Mitchell trade happened, but it wasn't at all to the Knicks. We've talked about the Cavs, where like, they've been kind of a disappointment, I think. After having a really good season last year, although it ended not very well, right? An upset in the first round in 5 games. Um, they've taken a step back, right? The record isn't horrible, 12-9, but they are eighth in the Eastern Conference. It needs to get better. Obviously, they've had some guys out. Mitchell hasn't signed the extension. I'm assuming he's not going to sign one,
Right.
just because I think he can get more money, right? If he just gets to the end
Mm-hmm.
of the contract. But either way, I guess then the question is like if you're Cleveland and you kind of have another disappointing year, right? Then it's like, is he gonna be a guy that's interested in staying? I don't know. So again, I do think if you're the Knicks, you should be aggressive in terms of hunting for stars. I don't think Cleveland's ready to do anything yet, just because I think they'd like to see some more games with all their guys, because they did have a stretch early in the year where all their guys were out. But it is something to keep an eye on, in terms of Cleveland, because again, it is a team where it's like, if they underperform this season, you could see a change in the offseason. It may not have to be Mitchell. It could be somebody else on the team. It could be like a Jared Allen or somebody like that. But either way, I do think the Knicks should go star hunting. But at the same time, their record is fine, right? They're fifth in the East. They're 12
Yeah.
and 8, right? So one less loss than the Cavs, but they are fifth in the Eastern Conference. And I
They
think
do
they've
need
been,
another star, though. They need it.
and that's the main thing. I do feel like the Knicks definitely need some more star power that's better than what they got. But anyways, what do you think of that? Because like I said, I'm not ready. I don't think the Cavs are ready to like just call it quits and just bail
Yeah.
yet. I
What?
don't
It's
think
their
they're ready.
second season with Donovan Mitchell, right? Yeah, it's
So
too
I
early
like,
to tell, but like I do
yeah,
understand the Knicks, wanting Donovan Mitchell, and what's crazy is they could have drafted him and passed on him completely. I'll never understand that. But I don't know. The trolling last year was really bad with Donovan Mitchell and the Knicks, man. So I don't even know if that is a possibility at this point. But I do understand why they want him. I think he's, a really good player. Like I said, he's just not having, one of the elite seasons that we're accustomed to from him. Um, but, my question would be, what do you move to get him in terms of, well, what are you giving up? Because I don't think Cleveland would take Julius Randle, plain and simple.
right, exactly.
You'd
They
have to
already
give
have
him RJ.
right, yeah, they already have Evan Mobley and
Right.
Jared Allen. So not that Jared Allen is untouchable. I just mean
Right.
like you don't need Randall with Mobley.
Yeah.
Like that would probably
That
not be
might be
ideal.
even worse.
Maybe.
I think it would
Um,
be even worse.
it would certainly be a different look, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
it'd be
Um,
ugly.
yeah, and like with Mitchell, he's averaging 28 a game,
Right.
5 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, 45 from the field, 36 from three. So the efficiency is down.
Yep.
And again, like the thing with the Cavs is defensively they've still been pretty good, but the offense has not been good at
Right.
all. And that's with like some of those additions, right? Like Max Strus, who's playing pretty well, right? Like Niang, who's been okay. So that's the main thing for the Cavs is if they can figure out a way, to improve on offense, that would help. But again, I don't feel like with the roster they have, that's probably gonna happen. Like I'm not saying that like they're doomed to be an 8th seed. I'm just saying like, I think some of it is like Garland's not playing as well, so maybe if
Yeah.
he plays better, that will help. But like they're also another one of those teams where they're like, in the bottom third of the league in offense, right? So are they going to be able to get into, go from like 20 whatever, to all the way up to like I don't know, 12 or,
Right.
13 or something like that?
Highly
Maybe,
doubt
but
it.
I feel like, that type of improvement probably would need to come from a trade, right? Like if you're going to move, several spots up from where you already were, right? Like that's probably going to have to come from, some type of deal, maybe if you can, like I said, maybe you might have to move Jared Allen and get like a, more of like a floor spacing big out there,
Right.
um, something like that. Because again, they're 22nd offensively, so ideally you'd like to get, be above average, right? But like, is Darius Garland playing better? Is that enough to move you up 7 spots? Like, I don't know. It could, but
No.
like,
The team in general has to play better, I think. But
right. So that's kind of where we are, like with the Cavs right now, where it's like it does feel like a disappointment. They had some bad injury luck early on. Now they got their guys, so we'll see what they can do. But it is weird because again, they were very good last year, and I thought they'd be a little better. But so far they have not. So we'll see. But again, we're already 20 games in, so you're kind of at a point where you have like a decent sample size of like how to evaluate them. Again, it's a little bit different because they've had guys out, but still.
Right.
Um, yeah, so that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, crazy in-season tournament action, right? The in-season tournament's coming to a close, so obviously we'll have all that for you. When we do our next episode. Again, we appreciate all the love and support, right? Continue to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on the in-season tournament. What you think of it. What things do you like, not like? What would you change? Maybe give your thoughts on who's going to win that, last game between the Lakers and the Pacers, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, exactly. So just let us know. Again, like I said before, like, comment, and subscribe. We appreciate all of it, and we'll see you next week.